All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thank Dog We Made It, the YouTube live series. And we have been going through sort of a sew-along for the DIY Festive Dog Coat, which is based on the Cozy Coat, but what we're doing is making it into a festive coat for the season with some really nice bright colors. This is part 3 and part 4, so if you have been following along, you may have noticed that part 3 never really materialized. And if you were live on the part 3 call, you would have noticed that there was no audio, which is why part 3 didn't ever go live again. It never was out there. So what I'm doing today is I'm catching up a little bit, and I'm going to go through part 3 and part 4. So part 3, what I'm doing is I'm using the video that I did shoot while I was live, but I'm just going to talk through it so that you can see what I was talking about. And then part 4, I've got a few videos that I want to show you. This one's going to be a little bit longer probably because it's a little bit more in depth and that I've got a lot to catch up for and cover. But it will be a great informative series, videos, couple of videos, and so let's get started. So first of all, I wanted to show you the live video that I shot the other week, and I'm just going to talk through it so that you can see what it was I was talking about and the process that I did to get the pattern ready and start moving along on this series. So let's get the video going. So first of all, the one thing that I did was first we cut, probably help if I actually went over the video. So the first thing we did here was I talked about how I moved the withers line. So I'm making this coat for my dog Scout, and she has an extremely long neck to withers line. So I needed to shift this down quite a bit in order to get that belly band with this part right here to have that position behind her front legs properly. So as you can see, I've cut this and I've moved it over, and also as it comes down to the end, it actually, there's a very short end there. So I cut that end off, and normally I would add a bunch of fabric to join in between these two pieces, but we're going to be doing the ruffled skirt here, so I don't need that piece. But I will add a little piece onto this to join the two. The other thing that I talked about in that is that there was this hat that I'm going to be putting on, and I'm going to be sewing this hat along this collar edge of the coat. And I did go over how to get that hat pattern and also how to resize that hat pattern, how to print it out on your printer so that it fits the right size that you're working with. So I do go over that, and I will put the link for how to get that hat as well so that you can make that if you want to add that to your coat. The next thing I did was talking about here is the fabric that I'm working with. So this is my waterproof fabric, and I love this fabric. It's got this beautiful backing to it. It is a PUL, a polyurethane laminate, and you can see this white portion here. That's the actual waterproof side. The portion of it, and then the inside is this lovely silver backing to it, and it's just a dream to sew with. It just glides through your sewing machine so easily. It doesn't get caught up in the feed dogs at all, so it's really lovely to work with. One of the other things about this fabric is that it is really works really well with the needles. The needle punching it don't wear down on the fabric quality. So one of the things, I just want to show you a few different pieces of polyurethane. This is a yellow piece, and the white backing is the polyurethane backing, and it is exposed. And on that other one that I showed you, you could see the white layer. It was covered. So that makes it a better fabric. But this one is exposed, and it's still a really good fabric to work with. And this one here has another type of polyurethane on it to make it waterproof. But I want to show you one here that is just really not very good fabric at all. This one is, it just breaks down really easily. If I show you here, you can see just by scratching it, I'm scratching off that polyurethane laminate. And that, as soon as that's off, it's no longer waterproof. You can also see these little stitches. These are little stitch lines that I've made while sewing, and it just, again, it degrades that polyurethane, the waterproof nature of that fabric. The fabric that I'm working with on this coat has this extra layer over top, so it really protects that waterproof nature of the fabric, and I just love this stuff. So now this is the wool that I'm going to be working with, and I just wanted to talk about the two different kinds of fabrics. When you're working with a wool or like a weave or something that has a bit of a stretch to it, and you're working with a waterproof fabric that doesn't have any stretch, there's a real difference. And there's also a really big difference in the thickness of these two. So if you look at this fabric here, you can see that it's quite thick, and it is quite a bit different than the waterproof fabric. So you can see here on this fabric, it's super thin comparatively to that thick wool. And so by adding a backing to it, it allows me to make this a bit thicker and match the weight of that thicker wool. So take a look at these a little bit closer up to the camera, and you can see the difference in that thickness. See how thin this waterproof one is compared to the thickness of that wool. It really is quite different. And also just the weight of it, the drape of it is quite different as well. So it's really important to think about this when you are working with fabrics and different kinds and mixing different types of fabrics. So I'm bringing in this one here. So this is a fabric that I had chose to work with. It is a cotton-based fabric, and it's a nice weight, and the combination between it and the other it makes it quite an even weight. I also am adding a reflective piping. You probably can't see the reflective nature of this, but it is a great piping because what it does is it makes the dog more visible in the really low light situations. It just pops. You can really see your dog outside at nighttime. And the other thing I really like about working with the piping is it just gives the whole coat just a really nice professional finish when you join the two. So that's why I typically will line my coats and then run this piping around the edges. I wanted to talk about linings and the importance of choosing a lining that's right for the type of dog that you have. So if you've got a dog that has a double coat, you want to have some kind of a lining that's really a nice breathable fabric and very light, or maybe even a mesh. So that's what I was talking about there. I do have a whole video that I go over this, plus a cheat sheet that shows you all the different types of dog breeds, their hair type, and the type of fabric that you might want to choose if you're going to line the jacket. This portion here, I'm talking about the fabrics themselves and grain lines. So a waterproof fabric doesn't have a grain line to it. It does have a grain line, sorry, but it doesn't have a weave to it. And so there isn't the need to work with a grain line isn't as important as it is when you're working with something that is a woven fabric. So with a woven fabric, you can see the threads up at the top here, and those will pull out. That gives you a hint that it's a woven fabric. And the lines, the threads of the fabric are moving in, they're woven in between each other, so they work in opposite directions. So when you're working with a woven fabric, it's super important that you do find the selvage edge, or at least find which way the grain line works on the fabric so you can match it up to your pattern. So as you can see on the pattern here, there is a grain line. It's that arrow. So most patterns will show you the grain line, especially if it's an important factor with the coat. And so you want to match that grain line up to the grain line of your fabric. And the grain line always runs perpendicular to the selvage edge or the edge of your fabrics. So that's a bit of a hint. The other thing you can check to find your grain line is the way it stretches. So up and down it doesn't stretch too much, but side to side, like across, you get a real stretch in your fabrics. So that's another way to find your grain line. And again, when you're working with a waterproof fabric and a weave fabric, you do also want to make sure that you are following, it can be a challenge. So one of the things to work with is the difference between a stretch fabric and a non-stretch fabric, and I have a whole video on that. So the other thing I wanted to touch on is the use of clips versus pins. So I always, when I'm working with waterproof fabric, I always work with clips, because the pins will make punctures into your polyurethane laminate, your waterproof fabric, and just like I showed you on this fabric, it can really start to break down that fabric. And as soon as that backing is broken down and it's gone. Like that waterproof nature of the fabric is gone, and it's just kind of not really all that useful anymore. The other thing I want to touch on in this video here, excuse me, is the type of needles that you want to work with. So when you're working with a waterproof fabric, I would get a Microtex needle. And these needles are really great because they have a super fine tip on them. They make the tiniest little puncture in that waterproof fabric. And every time you puncture it, you're breaking down the waterproof nature. So you want to make that as small as possible. When you're working with a wool, you'd be working with a universal type needle. And the universal needle, that's just a standard, it will work with just about every type of fabric that you've got. But when you are working with a combination of the two, the waterproof fabric and the wool or some kind of a woven fabric, you're going to want to stick with the Microtex needle because you are working with that waterproof fabric. So if you've got a combination of the two, stick with the Microtex needle. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is just quickly run over how I lay out that pattern onto the fabric. So you want to try to find where the grain line is on the fabric and then fold your fabric accordingly. So I've got the grain line here, you can see on the pattern, and then I'll take my fabric and I'm going to be placing this pattern needs to go onto the fold of the fabric. So I'm going to fold my fabric so that I've got enough material so that it will be enough for my whole pattern that I'm going to do, including that belly band. And the belly band does come down quite low, so you want to make sure you've got a good piece of fabric there folded. And once you get your fold up, the next best thing to do is to start to match up those selvage edges. So once you kind of get it into position, then take your fabric and start to even it all out so that you've got your selvages are all lined up nicely. And what I typically try to do here too is I'll line up my selvages so that I've got so I make sure that I've got a good 90-degree fold on this. And then I'll take a clip and I'll clip those pieces together so that they will hold together. When you're working with a waterproof fabric, it's super slippery. It will slip around quite a bit. So it's quite a good idea just to clip them together so that it doesn't slip around as you're doing this layout. So once you get that all kind of cleaned up and a nice fold to it, then I typically will add a few other clips just to kind of hold it in place. And then I will start putting my pattern into position so I can outline it. So get that up to the fold. So as you see on this, I do have the fold here. I'm going to take that where it says place on fold is exactly where I'm going to do it. I'm going to put it onto the fold of that fabric. The other thing you want to make sure that you're avoiding, a lot of the materials will have a little bit of a hole in it or a stitch line or something and this is where it's been held in the machines when they're making the fabric. So you just want to avoid that when you're cutting. So just come to slightly to the edge of that, so just to the right of that, so that you're not actually using that in your material, in your coat. You don't want to have those little weird markings on your coat. So then I'm just going to clip it to it, and then I get my trusty chalk pen here and outline the whole pattern. So it's pretty simple, as you know. You're just going to run around that pattern, outline it as well you can. It's really great to use a chalk, like a tailor's chalk, that will wash out. And you can easily take that off so it doesn't mark the fabric. Sometimes you'll make a mark in an area that you're actually going to be visible. The other thing that, because I cut off the back of that coat from the pattern itself, it didn't have a seam allowance. So I was just adding the seam allowance on the right side there just to give myself some material that I can attach the other one to. So the next thing I would do after I finish outlining the whole thing is cut it out. The other thing I wanted to show you was just that inside fabric again, and I would do the same thing with this. I'd use that same pattern, but this time it is far more important that I do find the selvage edge and find the grain line and make sure that I'm cutting this pattern out using that grain line. As I said, with the waterproof fabric, it's not as important, but it is when you're doing it with something that is a woven fabric. The last piece that I wanted to look at here is the wool, my favorite beautiful wool that I've been holding on to for quite some time now. And this is where I am going to be cutting the skirt portion. So this is the little tail piece, the piece that I cut off of the back of the coat. And as you can see, it's really tiny, and with the length that I've got for Scout and her body, I'm going to be adding quite a lot more. And also this is where that whole nice beautiful ruffle is going to go. So I'm going to have a really big piece of gathered fabric along here. So I'm going to be cutting this again on the fold. So I'm going to just make myself a little line there and then fold that fabric so that I can cut the pattern on the fold. So I'm just going to grab that and then match up my edges and fold it. And then I'll just clip that together so that it holds in place, just so that your fabric isn't slipping around as you're measuring and cutting out or outlining your pattern pieces. The other thing that I just wanted to quickly finish off here with is creating the hat. So I'm going to make the hat out of the same plaid fabric. So again, it's really important, just line up your fabric so that it's laying really nicely. I'm not cutting this piece on the fold. You don't actually have to cut it on the fold, but you are doing it so that you have two opposite pieces. So I typically will put this on a fold if I have the fabric to do that, and then I will just line that up on the edge of the fold, and then I'll cut those pieces apart afterwards. So I will just clip this pattern piece to the fabric so that it isn't moving around as I am outlining it. And then I'm just going to make a little bit of, I'm going to clip that second piece here. And then I'll just simply outline the fabric, the pattern piece onto that fabric. This is where you're going to sew that pattern piece, and you're going to sew it to the collar line here. So we'll talk about that in the next portion of this series, but that's where that hat will be attaching around that edge. All right, so we did that one. I'm just going to start running the next video. So I'm just going to transition over here. I can't tell why that video didn't play. Of course, with all the practices I did, it worked perfectly, but Murphy's Law, it's not going to work when you are going live. The other thing that I wanted to touch on today is just some questions that I've been getting in from people. What I wanted to talk about is someone sent in a question about how would you take this pattern. I was going to show you this overhead, but taking the pattern and having it so that it would drape down longer. So if you had a dog that was a little bit larger than the pattern that you're working with, and you want that pattern to come down a little bit longer on the sides. So again, this is the, if I move back, that might help. Okay, so that's the full pattern. And if we wanted this coat to drape down further along the body on the dog, so it came down further on the sides, how would you go about doing that? That was the question that people asked. So what I did is I put the answer into the comments, but what I wanted to just show you here is that you've got a couple of different options. So this is much better. So if I wanted to drape the coat so it went down a little bit further, then what I would do is I would cut the coat. You have two options. So you can either cut the coat right here on where the bottom of the collar, the top of the collar and the bottom of the curve, just before where the curves start, you could cut straight across your pattern all the way to the other side. So that's one option. And then you would just simply separate those pieces and then add some extra space in there, and that would drop the whole pattern down. But you got to keep in mind that if you are doing that and you're dropping this portion down, so it's coming down a little bit further, you are also going to then be increasing, it's hard to do this on the opposite, you're going to also be increasing the length of the collar circumference or the neck circumference on your dog. Because by dropping this down, you're adding in some extra space in there. So that means that the collar is going to be bigger. The neck area is going to be bigger. If you had to add some extra space in for your neck as well, then that would be one good option that you could do. The other option that's a little bit simpler would be to just take your pattern and cut it straight across. Take the neck area here. This is the part that wraps around the neck on the dog, and just cut simply straight across, right across there. And then drop that piece. So when you cut that cut your pattern into two, drop that piece down, add yourself a little extra piece in here. That's going to drop down the whole length of the coat. So you can drop it down as far as you need to get to that extra space down there that you need for your drape. And then what that's going to do is it's going to increase the width of the wrap that goes around the neck on the dog, but at least you don't have to start working with the curves and changing the collar size and working with the neck circumference. This is just going to make it a little bit deeper around the neck area. So that's a little bit of a simpler approach. The other thing I just wanted to mention about that is that I do have other sizes. Now I give away the medium size coat pattern for free, but I have all the other sizes from extra small all the way up to extra large. So if you are really trying to increase the size of that, if you're only adding an inch or something like that in, you just want a little bit more drape, that's fine to go about that, either one of those processes to make it a little bit longer. But if you are trying to make it for a much bigger dog, I would not suggest going that way. I would suggest going with a larger size, and it is available on my website. They're not that expensive, so very easy to just go in there and get the size that's actually closer to your dog. And one of the things that I do suggest that you do is that you work with the size that is closest to the chest circumference of your dog. So when you measure that chest circumference, look at the sizes and determine what is the best fit for that chest. And the reason for that is because of the drape of the dog coat. If it fits around the chest, it's likely going to have enough of that drape on the side there. If it fits around here, this chest portion, this is the portion that wraps around the belly, it's also likely going to have enough of a drape down here. So, again, if you want to work with the free pattern, you can probably do as much as you want with that to try to nudge it down a little bit. If you're working for a far bigger size, you can either download that pattern, get that pattern off of my website, and I'll put the link down below when I go back into that description. I'll put that link down there. But if you have something that's a much bigger dog or a much smaller dog, you're probably going to want to work with the pattern that's right for you, or you could always just scale that down in your printer, print it out at a smaller size or print it out at a bigger size. But be aware when you do that, generally when you are scaling a dog pattern, you don't want to be just simply scaling it up. I did go through this in a whole video about how you would alter or grade that idea of sizing from one size to another is called grading. I do go through a whole video on that, and it isn't really recommended to just simply scale it, like using your printer to scale it at a different size. But you can do that if you just be aware that that's gonna, it doesn't. Dogs' body shapes just don't scale uniformly. They scale differently in different areas. So just be aware that if you do change the pattern size with your printer, you're going to want to do some customization to get the belly band. You want to make sure that your withers in the belly band is in the right place. You want to make sure that the neck circumference is correct. All of those things. Anyways, hopefully that will, nice blurry look there. Hopefully that will help you for that person that was looking for how to go about changing the length on the coat. If you have any further questions on that, do let me know. The other thing another person asked me was she's making a dog coat for Dachshunds. Dachshunds, as my dad is always correcting me. I didn't pronounce it properly. Dachshunds, I believe. I don't even know. I can't say it properly. Anyhow, one of the things she was talking about was challenges around working with a really heavy, like a really stretchy fabric. That can be a challenge, especially if you're working with, if you're trying to combine it with a waterproof fabric, because stretch fabric works so differently especially when you're sewing it, it stretches when it's in the machine. Even the feed dogs that pull that fabric through are constantly stretching the fabric too. So that can be a real challenge. But the specifically what this person was asking me about was regarding fabric that's bunching up. So this is here, let's get back so you can see the whole thing. This is the collar area here, and this is the part that wraps around the belly. So this is where the front legs sit on the dog. And she was saying that there's a bit of a problem here where this is bunching up around this dog area, around the leg area. So I'm trying to get some more details about what specifically that challenge is, but a couple of things that I can imagine would be a little bit challenging are the amount of fabric. So one of the things you really want to make sure is you check exactly where that neck to withers point is. So that's your neck here. Your withers is the withers on the dog. You measure where that is, but the withers on the dog is exactly where their shoulders are, and it's directly up from, it's on their spine, and it's directly up from where the front legs on the dog are. So once you find that withers point on your dog, you want to measure that against the pattern itself, and then move that along or closer up depending on the chest size of the dog. So if your withers point is really short, then you're going to be moving that belly band quite a bit further along towards the collar, towards the front of the coat. If the withers line is quite long, then you'd be moving this back. So one of the reasons that this could be bunching up around the front legs is that this withers position is not correct. That could be what one of the challenges are. The other reason is because Dachshunds have these little tiny short legs. So if this person that was asking the question, they're not working with the cozy pattern. They're working with a pattern that has legs in it, like it has arms included in the pattern. So if you've got a lot of extra fabric in there, because of the stretch perhaps of the fabric, or because you're working with a pattern that has longer legs, you do want to take into consideration how much fabric you need to cover those little tiny legs on a Dachshund. Because if there's too much fabric there, that's going to make it really hard for the dog to move, and it just bunches up and it's really uncomfortable. So again, don't have all the details about what they're looking for that specific problem, but two things to look for is your neck to withers point and making sure that belly band is in the correct position. And the second thing to look for is just how much fabric that you have here on the little legs. So pretend that the legs are here. How much fabric is here in this whole area here that could be getting in the way of them walking and bunching up there. So hopefully that will give you a little bit of an idea of how I would address those two separate issues, how to deal with the bunching up of the fabric behind the front legs, and also if you're trying to have your dog length, the coat length, drape down a little bit further on the sides. That's how I would do that. I would cut along that line that I showed you how to do. So I'm just going to check to see if there are any questions. I'm just going to flip over to the other screen. I don't see, so does anybody have, oh, I see Allison said, hearing double, talking now better. Okay, thank you, Allison, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. What I will do is get that part 4 together into a video so that you can watch it. So you'll see part 3 and part 4. I'm going to put those into separate videos. They're not part of the live, so you can just watch those at your own speed. And I will just do an overhead example of how I would deal with the cutting of the pattern so that you could have an extra drape on that. So I'll do an overhead on that. So I hope that my video is recording for this last section. And if not, then you'll catch it all in the new videos that I put out that are not part of the live stream. All right, I will call that a finished video. Please do let me know if you have, oh wait, hearing double, wait, is still here. Allison says she's still here. And Ingrid says still here. and hear you loud and clear. Okay, but can you see me? That's the question. Are you seeing me talking? Are you seeing my mouth move, or is it just that silly blurred picture of me? Thank you. Still here and loud and clear. Okay, well, you're welcome, Ingrid. Hopefully, I know, Ingrid, you're the one that had the question, so hopefully I managed to answer that. Even if you couldn't see me, hopefully you could hear me. But I'm not sure if you actually are able to see anything. But thank you for your input. I do appreciate it. Oh, Ingrid says that yes. So I'm assuming that means yes, you can see me. Okay. Well, when I look at it, all I see is a frozen frame. So I'm so glad that you were able to hear the last part of that. You gotta love live. It's just, well, it's live, and all those mistakes just come along with it. Thank you for your input. I will do a couple of, as I said, I'm going to do an overhead, a little bit of a cleaner example of those 2 questions that I got, so that I could make it a little bit cleaner. And I'll put all of those videos just as themselves so that you can see them outside of the live. So thank you very much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. I hope at one point I will be able to get through one of these live sessions without having the technical problems. But I appreciate you hanging in with me here. And we'll see you next week. Actually, no, sorry. Next week is Christmas. For me, anyways. I do celebrate Christmas. So next week I will not be live. That's next Thursday, the 25th. So I'll be off for a week. But I will put the video together, the final video together, where I'm sewing that coat together. So you get to see the final piece with that coat all finished, and you get to see the finished product. So Scout will be wearing her coat in time for Christmas for me. And for those of you that don't celebrate Christmas, you'll still hopefully have, if you're making this along with me, you'll have a nice coat that is for your festive season. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you in a few weeks. I will put out, let you know when I'm going to be going live again. Have a great holiday season, and we will see you all very soon. Thanks again. Bye.